call the meeting to order. You ready to go? We're recording for the live. All right. So this meeting is being recorded for WHCA for later use. And if you could, as we start with all meetings, rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So, perfect timing. So the next item we have is public comment, if there is any, and I don't see anyone, so don't think we have any public comment. We did get some public comment at school committee, and I'm hoping the various other boards and committees did as well. But the next item we have is just the housekeeping of meeting minutes. So I would entertain a motion to approve the meeting minutes of February 13, 2023.
So moved.
Second. Any discussion? All those in favor? Unanimous? Okay, I would entertain a motion to approve the meeting minutes of February 27th, 2023.
So moved.
Second. Any discussion on those? All those in favor? Unanimous. Wonderful. Okay. So the next item is, and really the main course for tonight, is to talk through kind of the feedback we got. So we had the consensus document, the one that was last updated on February 27th. We sent that to everyone, and hopefully there was an opportunity to have some discussion. So what I was thinking is we'll just go kind of one by one and see what we got for comments or any type of, if there were either any type of consensus discussion or votes taken. This last school committee meeting, this was what we focused on. We did take votes on all of them, so we can kind of give you the feedback of the votes, kind of do that the same. So the first one, which I will preface, I think was probably the longest discussion at the school committee meeting. I don't know how it went with others, but I know that one took a bit. So it was a lot of discussion. It was around representation. So I don't know if folks anyone want to kind of go first on how their committee voted, talked about it?
I can jump in.
Everyone's going to have a turn.
Yeah,
So.
that was also our longest discussion, I think. In the end, the board voted 2-3 against recommending it, mostly concerned around school committee votes getting kind of jammed up on must-pass things like reorganization. I'm sure it's the same. I think it's the same conversation the school committee had for why there was some hesitation. I would say that after watching the school committee meeting, I'm a little more amenable personally to the 2/3 on financial matters that Hillary brought up during your discussion. So depending on where we end up, I may bring that back. I was one of the dissenting votes, so it could carry some weight.
Okay. You want to go?
Sure. I'll go next. We had a 5-0 vote, pretty much across the board on everything. But quite honestly, the 2/3 vote probably took the least amount of time. I wanted to apologize publicly to this committee, especially to Chris, only because, Chris, when we talked about it as a committee, I never mentioned, the methodology.
Right.
Because with this committee, I didn't think I had to. But, last week at the school committee meeting, I did get up and I spoke during public comment about why Hanson wants the 2/3 vote on financial matters, not everything across the board. I thought as a group, we got rid of that pretty quickly by saying it would be financial matters and that type of thing. But as far as this committee goes, I didn't think it needed to be brought up. The question will be what happens years from now when some of us may not be here. And this committee changes as well as both boards and the school committee could possibly change where, say, 6 years from now, there's a different view. So, I mean, that's, I think, why I never needed to bring it up. So as far as that is concerned, I just wanted to make, the public statement about that.
Yeah, I kind of felt like I had an understanding of where it came from, and I didn't feel like we really had to talk about
Finance committees, did you talk about it?
Yes, we did.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
It doesn't matter, we're all going to go. So it doesn't
Also,
matter.
we're in agreement on the majority of the items. We do agree with the financial matters that 2/3 votes would maybe ease some hard feelings from years ago from the change in the methods. However, we don't want things to be hung up, every vote be hung up because the 2/3.
Did you vote it, or was it just
No,
more
we didn't.
consensus?
We
That's
just
fine.
discussed it.
So there was kind of consensus
Yeah.
support for it?
For the 2/3?
Yes.
Okay, yes.
Okay, got it.
And the Whitman Finance Committee voted 8-0 to oppose, the 2/3. We didn't differentiate financial votes versus other votes, but just thought requiring 7 affirmative votes for a committee of 10, when right now it's only 6, would put an onus on the school committee to come to agreement on things that shouldn't require 2/3.
Okay, so let's kind of maybe have some open discussion and see where we can get to. So so I guess, and so part of that confusion, I'd say might have been mine too, because I wasn't thinking that 2/3 was the statutory methodology was really the overriding thought for that. Is that, I guess maybe from the Hanson side, do we think that's where the main concern is, that it could, we got to this point, now it could flip back? Do you think that's the primary concern, Jim? Is that, you think, or?
I think that's a driving factor why that was proposed.
And it is a possibility, down the line, which, I looked up before tonight's meeting what the definition of a partnership is. And I would ask everybody to do that. I'm not going to pull my phone out and tell you what it is. I think we all know what it is. But if one of the partners in a partnership has any kind of apprehension about going into a deal because what could happen down the line, then is it really a partnership where we want everything to be equal? And if it's going to be statutory, it's going to be statutory forever.
Yeah, no, and I guess so again, that's where I'm trying to think this through, right, in the hypothetical sense. So if we did require a 2/3 vote, let's just say we all agree, and it was 2/3, how does that prevent that issue?
To go back to the alternative method?
So let's just say, so right now it's 6-4, right? We have 6 members from Whitman and 4 from Hanson. So there's a couple hypotheticals. So one, we can say, let's keep it static, right? Let's presume it's still 6-4. But then that could also change, right? Populations could shift over time. Now, they haven't in, 60 years? Yeah. But they could, right? Like if we're going to play, if we're thinking this through, right? So, but let's, for sake of sanity for a moment, let's just say it's 6-4. So if it is 6-4, the thinking would be, it would require a member from Hanson to okay the switchback. And so I guess this is where I kind of get hung up a little bit, because having sat in this room when we had that issue, the 2/3 for the budget requirement was what kind of caused us, I think, to have a compromise. So, I think there was probably a majority support. I'm going to guess. I don't know if we actually voted the agreement at that point, but I think there was clearly seemed to be a majority support of hey, we want to move to the statutory 6 Whitman members and 4 Hanson members. So, well, wait a second, I'm not so sure about this. But regardless of that, when we got to a budget vote, it died right there, because we couldn't pass a budget, because that is by law required to have a 2/3 already, regardless of what we decided. So that's where it would stop. It would get held up right there, because we kept voting pretty much every meeting. 6 Whitman were in favor of the budget, 4 Hanson were not. The budget didn't pass it, so we kept going back, I think, until we got to that compromise. And then when we got to the compromise, I think it passed. It was either 9-1 or 10-1. So I guess that's what I'm trying to think through is, if we stayed at 6-4 and 10 years from now there was some reason to try and change it to the agreement method, I don't see how the same wouldn't play out, right? You'd have, again, just using this as an example, so now it's Whitman wants to go back. I get that's one of the concern, right? If Whitman wants to go back to the agreement methodology, there's 6 members on the board that say, yeah, we want to go back. I think you're going to have the 4 Hanson members that are going to say no on the budget, and nothing's going to happen, and we're going to end up in the same place. The difference being that within state law, it's already written that the default methodology is the statutory method. So the law is really kind of the critical piece here, because that's kind of what, regardless of what we were trying to negotiate then, it was kind of always defaulting back to, and if we can't agree, then we have to do it this way. So I think that's relevant, because if we were going to a future scenario, the same is going to hold true. If we can't agree, it is statutory. So I don't know, that's kind of where I'm trying to think it through. Is it really an issue? I don't know. Chris?
Yeah, so I tried so hard to think about different scenarios and whatnot, listen intently when people are, speaking on the matter, but it seems like it's more, I don't mean this in any other way than just, matter of fact, it's a principle. It's the principle. That's what it feels like, right? And that's okay if that's what it is. We can talk about that, but I don't feel, I haven't come to a point where I feel like it's would ever actually obstruct kind of get back to your point, Chris, of how it's going to get there anyway. You know what I mean? Like if we wanted to go back to an agreement methodology, we'd have to go through the process of approving with the 2/3, and it won't happen unless we get 2/3, right? So.
Well, even as we found last time, it's not solely up to the school committee to change the agreement, right? So we had to come up with some sort of compromise between all parties involved, and then we had to get an amendment that both towns agreed to and the commissioner signed off on. So I don't know, but if it's, that's why I'm trying to flush it out. If it's, the main reason for this is, hey, we're afraid of this, then I'm not sure I would agree. Now, if the main reason for this is, we're just going to feel better about this given what happened, and it's going to make us feel better, oh, okay, that to me is okay too, but that kind of changes some of the dynamic, because, I don't know, I just don't want to put something in place for something that I'm not sure can't happen.
I was very reluctant to move on this without really thinking it through, because to your point about partnership, I believe in that, as you know, and if there's some concessions that can be made to make the partner feel better, then that's the direction I was leaning towards. But again, I was trying to think it through and think, is that ever really going to become an issue? I couldn't get there, I couldn't land there, you know what I mean, where it would actually be an issue down the road. And I'm not sure I figured it out yet at all. I'm still open, I'm still listening.
Yeah.
And my point is, if you need 2/3, 2/3 of 10 is 7. Right now, if it's majority, it's a 6-4 vote. In order for Whitman 6 members can vote in unison, but they don't, except for the statutory method, they don't. If Hanson, with its 4 members, wants to put something forward, you're going to need 3 Whitman representatives to side with you if you need 7 votes to pass something. So I think it's needing 7 instead of 6 doesn't accomplish anything. If yes, the Whitman representatives who do not act in unison decided we're going to act in unison, well then Hanson never has a chance to have something discussed fairly and considered fairly. Moving it to 7 affirmative votes just is going to tie up that committee of 7. And I just look at it as a math thing, not a partnership, Jim. The only issue that really divided the 2 towns, I believe, was the statutory method. And as a Whitman taxpayer, I have less sympathy on the statutory method than Hanson representatives did, but that's just me.
Well, I'm not sure what it's going to tie up. A 2/3 vote on financial situations would tie up what? It wouldn't tie up the budget because you need 2/3 vote anyways.
Yep.
So if the 2/3 vote went in to protect Hanson from going back to the alternative method, it's not going to tie anything up. Now, I did think that the school committee kind of told us how they felt when it was the first time they were talking about it, and it was a 5-4 with 1 abstention vote. So what that told me was that the school committee was for it if...
So it was 4-5, the motion was to not support, and it was 4-5.
Right.
So
So
what you're
the
saying is
motion
accurate,
didn't
I just want
carry.
to make sure, right.
So it was
So
5-4.
there were 5 school committee members that were in support of the 2/3.
Yes.
And there were 4 that were not, and there was 1 abstention.
1 abstention.
Yeah.
And actually, David made a great argument that he didn't want to look like he was for it to send the wrong message or against it to send the wrong message. You know, if something happens tomorrow night with the Whitman Board of Selectmen that they re-voted and changed the vote, then I think it would be our duty to actually have an attorney sit down and look at the process to see how it would turn out. The only problem that I see with the whole thing is that it could affect the budget, which by law needs to be 2/3 already. So the only thing that I guess Hanson would be looking to add is if we were to change the methodology of what we use, it would have to be by a 2/3 vote. According to some school committee members, in recent years, that was the only vote that used town alliances. This would prevent any town alliances needing a 2/3 vote to change the methodology that we use. And the school committee would do their job, not as town representatives, but as representatives from the district. Can you give me a head nod on that one? Thanks, Superintendent.
I understand.
So, and you know, there shouldn't be, and it was said here Wednesday night, that there are no town alliances. But we know that's not always the case. With the methodology method, it can't be. And with the budget, it can't
But
be.
yeah, so I'm with you. I mean, so if we theoretically could just say that if we wanted to move from the statutory method to the agreement method, it required a 2/3 vote, do we get to where we're trying to go?
I think so.
Because, I mean, again, like a lot of,
There's no agreement
Hanson,
method.
exactly, there is no agreement method, and Hanson would not want to get rid of it. So, I mean, I just don't see how this is going to ever become an issue again, where Hanson wants to bring it up and Whitman says, yeah, it's a good idea, let's get rid of statutory. I just don't see it being something that is valuable.
Now, if we wanted to, and to go even further down the rabbit hole, if we wanted to amend the above minimum contribution costs within the statutory method, if that required 2/3 vote, because that's something that we could discuss in the next couple of years. So you take your statutory assessment up top is the minimum contribution, and then for anything above that, if we wanted to do something other than a population split, I think that could be, I don't think it's likely, but that's the kind of thing where this would come into play.
could, and we could have, again, broad language. I get your point. So I'm with you, but I can't in my head come up with a way that this is going to happen. But the whole point of this conversation is we're representing a lot of people, some of which have concerns and apprehensions from what's happened in the past. So if there's something that we can do that's going to help resolve that and at the same time not be punitive to us going forward, so be it, right? Because I mean, again, I sitting on the school committee, I do see some concerns with 7 votes on everything. Like that could be an issue. But again, like as I said at school committee, and I still believe it, honestly, if we have to take a little more time to get to 7 votes, it's probably a better thing. Because when we get to 6-4, I can tell you, like the next couple meetings, it's not usual. Like there's still some, you know, you got to kind of move to consensus. Like 6-4 is not helping us really move forward. It's barely getting us by, and we're not really resolving probably some of those. So I can kind of see both sides of this. But if the big thing to move us forward would be, hey, can we come up with a language that says, you know, if we're changing the methodology to be deployed from a pure use of the statutory method, including, you know, above the minimum local contributions requiring a 2/3 vote, there might be some language that, again, we're starting to compromise, so to speak, where we're moving away from some of the 2/3 requirements for votes, but we're solving, as it sounds like, the big concern. Because I don't hear a lot of concern with 2/3 votes for other things. It seems like it's all really on this one. So I don't know, what do folks think about that? Is that something we could explore? I mean, we could certainly reach out to legal counsel and say, hey, this is what we're talking about. How could we come up with some language that would solve this?
Yeah, so kind of to Jim's point about, you know, us not being here, whoever, the dynamics are going to change. So I'm not basing what I'm thinking about on what we've done in the past. That's a little bit irrelevant, really, in my mind. We're charting a course forward, you know what I mean? So I'd rather think of the potential scenarios, and if that involves getting legal counsel to help us through that, then I think that's what we should do.
But that would be a departure from 2/3 on everything.
Oh, absolutely.
And you
I
think
said it
people
right
would
from
be
the
okay with
beginning,
that?
it was only to make things simple, which, once we started discussing it, it would actually make it more
Devil's
difficult.
little details, right?
Yeah. Not to change the subject, but I think Hanson would be all for going back to the alternative method, if you guys want to do that now. Just saying.
So, all right, is everyone okay with us reaching out to legal counsel and seeing what we can come up with? Some sort of 2/3 vote language on methodology and utilization above the minimum contribution. Yes, no, maybe?
It's just a thought for being a devil's advocate.
Sure.
Possibly. Just plan our head a scenario where we've got a financial matter. We've got 6 Whitman folks voting one in favor of Whitman, and then we've got the 4 against voting that way. Which doesn't, again, it doesn't really show unity for working together. Is there any way, just thinking of this out loud, to put, to have some kind of opportunity for a challenge to that vote? If it's a 4-10 vote, I mean, if it's a 4-6 vote, so whatever the matter was, now it's in Whitman's favor, because you clearly saw the unity for Whitman or Hanson. Is there any challenge method where somebody on the committee or a resident could challenge that vote with reasoning that it appears that there was a clear division and a unity to represent the town? I'm just throwing this out there, it might be stupid, but
I think we brainstorm.
is there some type of language where somebody could bring a challenge to that and say, why don't, let's revisit this, reconsider, maybe change language, but, to me, there's a clear, Whitman was all in favor, Hanson was all in favor, but this benefits one town or the other. Can somebody come out and maybe challenge that, and then could there be language in the agreement that if something like that were to happen, that there is a mechanism for somebody to possibly challenge that? But again, the mechanism would have to be worked out with legal language on. I mean, because we don't want just anybody just to challenge votes
Well, that's-
constantly. We want to put something in place.
Uh,
But just
so-
a thought.
I appreciate all input, thoughts and all that, don't get me wrong, but it just seems like that's kind of circumventing all the rules and regulations that apply to school committees and what that job is, you know what I mean? And giving people an opportunity to contest things and dragging things out. I'm not aware of that, I've never heard of that, so I guess we could.
We could certainly look at it. I think the issue we're going to have, and again, I'm not an attorney and I'm not a DESI expert, but the whole one person, one vote thing is going to be the critical part, right? So as a duly elected official, right, I have 1/10 of the votes of the school committee, Chris has 1/10, and so on and so forth, in terms of the representation of the population, right? It is what it is. So the 6 people from Whitman have 60% of the vote, but it's designed that way because it's tied to population. So the only thing that I was thinking of when we talk about like a challenge to that would be, well, what is the basis? Because technically, if there are 6 Whitman people who are duly elected and authorized to carry 60% of the vote, you're almost starting to challenge the legitimacy of that authority to say, well, wait a second, it doesn't count. But at the same time, again, I think we're all kind of getting to the same place, and the red flag is, regardless of the situation or scenario, if you have 6 people from one town vote one way and 4 from the other, it's not good. And someday it might be 5-5, or someday it might be 7-3. And I think the logic that we're all arguing now would still apply, right? If it was 7-3 or 5-5, I think we'd still be having the same concern. Well, wait a second, anytime we have one town voting against the other in pure terms, it's a problem. So again, I don't know, I wonder about that too. Would the 2/3, change based upon the town dynamics? But I do think if we talk about the methodology, if that's really where the concern's coming in, and we think we're gonna need to address that in order to move this through, because this is gonna have to go to a town meeting in both towns, so we're gonna have to find middle ground. That might be something we can look at.
Well, to be honest, I didn't differentiate votes that were purely financial from votes of any other
Right,
nature.
like a field
So-
trip.
Exactly, or school choice.
School choices that
That-
are, right?
That you need 7 votes to do anything at this table just defy common sense.
Right.
That, and the votes are not town-based.
Right.
It's not Hanson thinks this and Whitman thinks that. 10 independent minds come to a different decision. It's really the financial stuff that tends to, people get their heels dug in because they know they have a constituency that's going to say, why did you vote for that when it cost me more money? So I didn't present this as a financial, I presented it as a 2/3.
And that's what, yeah, and that's how it should have been presented. That's what we talked about. Now I think we're talking about the nuances of how do we change it. And so that might be a takeaway. But again, I mean, we went through this in school committee. I think thinking of the last many, many, many years, we talked about the statutory, that was the vote. School choices had some close votes. However, as we learned and clarified this year, school choice is also very clear. You do not have an affirmative vote. So this would actually hold true whether it's majority or 2/3 or a supermajority. The way the law is written is, if you don't pass it, if you don't opt out, then it happens. So whether it's majority, 2/3, supermajority, same thing, right? If it doesn't pass, so the law kind of already covered that. And the only other time I can remember close votes was reorganization. Because some of those, I think, may have been close in the past. It might have been a 6-4. And I don't know about, I thought about that one, and I'm like, I don't know if I love sitting here over and over again with 2 people kind of arguing, like, at that point it's like, we got 6-4, we're moving on. I don't know, but those were really it. But I think maybe if we could take away see if we can come up with some language, if that's the consensus of this committee, to see if there's something we can come up with that would address some of that. We'll look at that, and then we can bring it back to our respective groups as a potential compromise. So, sound good?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. The next one was the agreement review language. This was my favorite one because I think we talked about it for 5 minutes and it was unanimous. But how did it go for everyone else? And I don't think there were any comments.
We voted 7 affirmative, 1 abstention. I can't remember what the reason for the abstention was. Maybe didn't understand.
It's fine.
7 out of the 8 voters. Because of that, I voted
To support
yes.
other folks. Aaron, you want to
We were all-
go? All in support?
Yes.
Go backwards. Jim?
I missed.
So this was the agreement review language. Did you guys vote on this, talk about this?
Very little, but we all agreed.
Good.
5-0.
Good. And Justin?
And this is also 5-0 supporting.
All right. Good work on that. Okay.
So 3 years, the clock will start right after the commissioner.
Yeah, we went back and forth, and I think there was some questions, and actually I thought this committee did a really good job because there were some questions that came out at school committee that were like, well, what about this, and what about that? And we're like, well, we actually talked about that. The reason we didn't say, the reason we ended up with the commissioner's signature was because technically it flowed out for a long time until he or she signs it, so that was a good one. Okay. Leases was the next one. Thoughts on that? Anyone want to go?
I mean,
Language?
yeah, we didn't discuss this too much. It was 5-0 vote to support the change.
Good.
And Whitman FinCom supports language that suggests that the rental of any vacant classrooms are set up such that a revolving fund would be attached to the school, renting out the classrooms, and the funds would be kept there for the maintenance of that school.
Okay. Which is what we had talked about here, but had left it out as this group. So we can kind of come back to that in a second. Aaron, you said support.
Yes.
Okay. So what does this group want to do? I know we had talked about the point that Kathleen brought out and kind of hash that out, if I remember correctly, not to belittle it, but I think the succinctness of it was basically like we didn't want to get into a position of school by school and just keep it district-wide.
Kept it district-wide because if I have a spot, I might have principals down have space, so they can get extra revenue for the building.
And it would create an equity issue too at some point where, one school is just bigger, they suddenly have a larger revolving fund.
Is that something that you'd be willing to kind of take back, given that it came from the Whitman side, just to kind of see what the selectmen's out on that, just to make sure that they understand the feedback?
Take it back there.
Okay. The next one was the capital and emergency repairs, so we updated some of the capital stuff. There was a comment about a question. So on section 3 there, the second paragraph, it talks about an article will be presented to the Selectmen's Office of the town for which capital improvements are requested. Approval of the voters will be required in order for the work to proceed. There was a question from one of the school committee members around the school committee's authority to put things on the warrant, which I know we've looked at in the past, and you followed up with Ken.
Yes. So only the selectmen can put things on the warrant. So I spoke to our legal counsel, who recommended to go back to your legal counsel to verify that that was true. I spoke to MASC, the Mass Association of School Committees. They said the same thing. And then Mars said the exact same thing.
We went through this on the mold issue.
Yeah, so I
Just the
think
exact,
that,
And even prior to that, I think there was something else before that. I think the language, and I don't have it in front of me, there is language in one of the state laws that says something like the school committee has the ability to assess,
yes.
and that's the key. So we could assess. Now it's up to the board of selectmen or select board to figure that out. So, I was in my head, I was thinking of a hypothetical. So if we decide to assess the town's X dollars, I don't think have the authority to say no, technically, but you would have the authority to put it on the warrant and then recommend it 0.5. So I think I think maybe that was some of the confusion, because indirectly you're kind of putting it on the warrant. Because if we are supposed to assess you, the towns, and you say, well, we're not going to do anything with it, then I don't know, someone could probably argue you got to pay the bill. Like, we assessed you, you didn't say no, it wasn't subject to vote or appropriation. So it's an indirect tool, but I think we clarified that at least everything that we saw was the school committee doesn't have the authority to say, right, hey, this will be article whatever X. Yeah. So we clarified that was the only thing that came out of school committee, but other than that, it was a 9-1 support. I think that's it.
Yes.
There might have been a couple other little things in the emergency repair section.
No, the other piece was the 72 hours.
Yeah. So in the emergency repair section, there was a question of
Authorization.
whether the 72 hours notice was appropriate. There was also some discussion as to whether the towns would have to approve before the work was done. We did share that we had talked about that, and it's, this is an emergency repair, so there isn't really an opportunity for approval. So I think that one was okay, but then we were left with just bringing back to this group, does 72 hours make sense? And I feel that it doesn't.
We were fine with it.
72 hours.
So my board did bring back a comment.
Yeah, what are your comments?
So we were fine with the capital language. On the emergency repairs, they wanted me to bring back, just prior to any repairs taking place, the district shall notify the TA and facilities director. I don't think Hanson has a facilities director in place right now, so we may have to work some language out. But, the member town has no obligation to pay without prior authorization. So that was just what was requested that I bring.
Wait a second, what was that last
Let
statement?
me read the full thing, because in context it makes a little more sense. Prior to any repairs taking place, the district shall notify the TA and facilities director. The member town has no obligation to pay without prior authorization. So if it's an emergency repair, at least a phone call to the TA probably. TA gives your pipes burst, fix them, A-okay, and then
So
does the
what if,
authorization.
did you talk about what would happen in that scenario if the authorization was not provided?
And so, no, I think we got stuck on actually it wasn't the mold issue, I think it was the parking lot issue, where it was an emergency repair of a parking lot, considered a capital cost, back and forth. The work was done, saw it as an emergency repair, we didn't feel the same.
Do you think that the argument there would have been simply, look, again, I'm just trying to think this through, but we do have language that says it poses an immediate risk to the safety of the district students or staff or threatens the operation of the school building. So do you think the argument could have been made subsequently of, hey, we're not paying this because it's not an emergency repair, and hash it out that way? Because I think the part that I'm going to struggle with, and that we talked about a little bit, is like if we have to have an approval, then it kind of defeats, like this is an emergency repair. So like, what happens if, something bad really happened, we got to fix it, and it has to happen, we're letting you know within 72 hours, but this is an emergency, it's posing a significant risk, right?
And so I personally thought the 72 hours met the standard of what we were looking for. It was just that
The
the
feedback.
board wanted to bring this additional caveat back.
Was there a vote on that?
It was after the amendment, it was 5-0 to send the full language back here. But
Okay.
there was no interim who supports it.
So would you think it would be, and we'll see if there's feedback from us, but do you think it would be okay if you were to bring back that, hey, like this was something we contemplated in both the original discussion and then subsequent discussions. The key is it's an emergency repair. So, got to give notice. Certainly if we want to have language that says, notice shall be provided to, and we define who that is, that's probably a good idea.
I think
because,
that's
right, otherwise Jeff can say, I let,
I think it's important. TAs know.
I let, whoever know.
TA, I think, is because the TA call cities, right?
Right.
It's not-
And it makes, it's common sense, but I think it should be listed there because some people don't have common sense.
Right. And we'll put at a minimum, the town administrator shall be notified, or do you want something else? You said facilities director?
Yeah, but I don't.
Just town
Town
administrator?
administrator, I think, meets what we're looking for
Yeah.
there.
So we could have language like that. So at a minimum, the town administrator shall be notified. We'll just insert that sentence right there, and then do you think you're okay kind of sharing some of the, this
Yeah, I
whole
can
approval
agree
thing
with
would put a monkey wrench in it, because then we're going to probably need language that says, and if it's not approved, like,
Because you don't necessarily want to wait for the Whitman Facilities Director to come and check out the flooded basement, or
Right.
whatever the situation is,
Right.
before you fix it.
right, we may not have an
Yeah.
insurance thing to happen.
That's
Yeah.
it. So if a sprinkler main breaks and the
Right.
TA's
Water's going
off
everywhere.
that weekend or something, and it's,
Right.
you never know what scenario might present itself, but if it's an emergency repair, that needs to be done, it's jeopardizing the health
Right.
and,
Yeah.
function of the district.
And I think the parking lot's a good example, because the school might say, well, this is a really big deal, we can't get our kids to school. But that can still be argued. Like, if that needs to be argued, then it needs to be argued. But I don't think we need to build a whole, well, now they can't fix the giant pothole because you say it's not, like, there's a giant pot, let's fix it and we'll hash it out after the fact. Yeah.
But we discussed this, that language for an emergency.
Mhm. I think we were all fairly okay with the language, it was just that little concern that it sounds like came up.
Yeah.
Right.
Notification inspector.
But I think it also sounds like Justin's willing to take it
And
back.
again,
Jim, on that note, how was it with the Hanson Board of Selectmen? Was that with support? Any questions or comments on that one?
no,
Support? Okay.
no, we're 5-0, we're 5-0 on everything.
Okay.
Just like the police.
Kathleen, support, and Aaron?
That's good. That's good.
And Whitman was 5-0, it was just the comment?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's, okay. So Justin, and we can add that sentence, absolutely, we can add, I think that's a good comment. The operating cost statutory language, that was 10-0 for us. Did anyone have anything different? Other than Jim wanted to renegotiate the whole thing. Other than that. And then lastly, transportation. As part, so that one was 10-0 for us. Anything different on transportation?
A little bit, because they like to provide comments for everything. So yeah, full agreement on the school committee controlling transportation. Dan gave us some background on why not mandated was split out. I don't need to share that with the whole committee, but it was interesting to learn. They did want to reinforce that the Whitman Board of Selectmen believes that the mileage method is the correct way to assess it, but putting it back in control of the school committee is the driver there.
Good. Understood. Anyone else have anything?
Well, we need the language to be clear that there's only one way to assess it, because right now there are two ways to assess it. It's the mandated costs are assessed per pupil, and then the non-mandated costs are assessed by whoever is riding the bus that town pays for it. And the Whitman Finance Committee, we don't have the language other than to say you can't have two different ways. That if it's per pupil, and we agree, the mileage method has earned additional reimbursement for the district, has saved the towns, at this point, probably $1 million, with no cost to services to the population. So it was a win-win situation going to mileage. But Whitman is still paying more for mandated based on the percentage of pupils riding. There are more Hanson students riding than Whitman, and then Whitman paying the actual cost of busing non-mandated students. So there has to be one way to assess the transportation.
Yeah, and I think we did talk about that. I think the trick becomes, we're kind of talking about how we deal with some of that statutory stuff, but that might be something that we have to just dig deeper into. I don't know how, but I don't think, they weren't suggesting that would necessarily be within the agreement. That would just be more of kind of the financial operations and how it's administered.
I'm not sure. We talked about, section 3 that is in blue. So
Yeah.
Special operating costs include costs unique to a particular town for maintaining programs or services. Identifying transportation as a special operating cost, just as capital is identified as a separate cost, and capital is assessed to the towns unless it's a high school item, and then it's split by percentage. That transportation should also be a special operating cost, and the towns should be assessed based on costs unique to a particular town. Costs will be borne by that particular town. So it's language that someone other than I has to come up with, but it's whoever incurs the cost pays for the cost.
So I don't know how to tackle that one.
You don't what?
I don't know how to talk about it. I don't know how best to attack that.
Well, one of the questions, I think it was this board, but may have been a different board asked, is how many other regions transport students who are within a mile and a half? How many other regional school districts actually provide non-mandated busing?
So the 3 that I spoke to, BR cut that about 9 years ago. DY and Dyke Rehoboth transport everybody.
So Dennis Yarmouth?
Dennis Yarmouth, and I attached, or I gave you those 3 regional agreements to look at, just as so I spoke to the business manager at Dennis Yarmouth, and because of the Cape and so many roads without sidewalks, they just bus everybody. Now, he didn't say how I would assume they apportion the cost the way they apportion the cost of mandated transportation, because it's not written in their language. DY is the same way, but Bridgewater Raynham cut everything under a mile and a half 9 years ago.
Yeah, I knew that. So you have the Dennis Yarmouth and the Dyke Rehoboth?
Yeah, it's in your packet.
It's in our hard copy packets, right? It's in
Yes,
our hard copy.
correct. But they just said, I don't know if it's written, they just said, the one thing they said, the school committee determines transportation, just like we were talking about it, we determine it, so we just bus all our kids. We don't break it out that every kid gets a ride to school. And
Sorry, Lisa, yeah.
Do any of these, obviously, they must face the same problem where one town is considered larger than the other maybe? Because I know we had talked about what result that BR has seen, if they've seen an increase in absences, tardiness when they wiped out the non-mandated busing. Have they seen any increases, or did parents figure it out?
So the interim superintendent said it took a while and a lot of arguing, but people figured it out. They figured it out.
But again, this was one of those complex issues because, not to take us completely off the rails, but this is kind of within the scope, right? I think if I remember correctly, if we eliminated all the 1.5 miles, then we're going to have some of that 75% ridership issues on the buses. So, we might fix one thing over here, but then we created a big cross. So now what are we doing there? Right now we're not. So it's not, the whole thing needs to be looked at together. And I think that's where Kathleen, my comment is I don't know how to tackle it. So I don't know if it's, the regional agreement is specific in terms of the transportation needs to be determined by the district. Now how we portion that and what that looks like.
Well, right now, the language is section 5 has 2 sentences, and
It's how we've interpreted it, right?
exactly.
It's all about
That
the
needs to-
interpretation.
It needs to be revisited, because it's, the non-mandated that gets sent to the towns to pay for. And if it's a school committee decision, it should be, we're going to bus everybody, and we're going to bus them based on the mileage method, and this is how the assessment will be broken up.
So it's a fair point in terms of, and I don't know, again, how we kind of do it, whether we bring multiple parties together and have a discussion on it or not, but I guess what you're suggesting, which the more we talk about it makes sense, is not only would it be the district's decision, but then how it's going to be assessed is going to be spelled out here.
Yeah.
So we have to kind of figure that out. I don't know how, or when that makes sense, because I know we're still messing around. Like, I don't know, if we didn't do the 1.5, I feel like it might not be one answer. If we do keep the 1.5, it might be a different answer. I don't know how some of that, with start times may impact all of that. So like, I don't know, I'm struggling with how do we figure that out first and then figure out what we're going to pay for? Because otherwise I feel like we're chasing, what we're going to pay for, how we're going to pay for it, but we don't even know what we're paying for yet. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
So maybe, but the more I appreciate the one better now, because I do think if we don't put it in here, we're just going to end up with 5 years ago. Well, I think it should be this way. I think it should be this way. Well, we used to do it, and like we probably should spell it. Chris, sorry, you were going to say something?
I'm just trying to think. There was some discussion about I hear you, and I think I agree with you on the mileage methodology for assessing the cost of the transportation. But isn't that another hit to Hanson? Isn't that what some of the, yeah? No?
No, it increased the reimbursement to the district by going mileage.
Say it again,
It
sorry?
increased the reimbursement to the district by going mileage.
I understand that, right?
And the mandated busing is assessed 60/40. It's assessed by the per pupil 61.06% and 38.94% next year.
Right.
So the mandated busing is currently being assessed on the per pupil
Right.
percentage. It's when you get to the non-mandated
That's what
then Whitman pays for all of its children who are within 1.5 miles,
Yeah.
and Hanson pays for all of its children that are within 1.5 miles. That's two different methods of assessment. And if you look at the percentages,
I'm not saying, again, I think I agree with you, Kathleen, but I'm just trying to recognize some of the pushback
Right.
from
So I guess,
some of the
right.
Hanson numbers.
So if we were to use that methodology this year, what would be the financial change to Whitman and Hanson?
the dollar figure would probably shift $30,000 from Whitman to Hanson.
Which I think is what Chris was pointing.
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't know the figure,
Yeah,
but
it's
I
not
knew
hundreds.
that's all I was trying to, so we're all,
Correct.
in the essence of partnerships, I'd rather
Yes.
discuss
That
this now.
is the hit, right?
It's all within that reimbursable limit, so it's only, this year, 10%, 5% of whatever changes.
I'm not sure.
So the proposed, if we switch to the mileage method, the non-mandated section is already on the mileage method, so the change would only happen on the reimbursable portion of the funds. So I think the $30,000 is based on a roughly $300,000 swing with a 90% reimbursement, right?
Yeah, but again, I think
Still a shift.
we have to go through it, but I think if I remember to the John Stanbrook's sheet with all the steps, we're kind of following that. We get to here and we do this, and I thought the do this was following the statutory method. And now we're creating an alternative method for transportation, which, again, for me as someone from Hanson kind of stings, because it's like, well, if we're going to start using the alternative method, then, I don't know, let's talk about special education, right? Right, maybe we should talk about that minimum local contribution and some of those items and what they are, because I'm not really sure it's equal. So, again, I think there's a compromise, and if we're going to go down that road, I won't be on this committee, but as a public citizen, I would start to make some pretty significant arguments that we should probably revisit some of those other costs as well, because $30,000 will pale in comparison to the cost of special education. And we can look at that above minimum local contribution way of doing that. So we want to open that door, I'm fine opening that door, but as a person, I'm not interested in opening it for one little section. I want to open it.
Well, I just think the current transportation policy needs to be clear. The language needs to be clarified, because right now, you need to send an amendment to, or an article to the town, for the town to fund, and the town could say, we're not going to fund it. And then what does that do to the school budget? Because it was a separate article last year, for the first time in my years as city.
So I think that we can, I think we did clean that up. I think we just said we were going to assess it. Now, again, how the select boards and selectmen decide to treat that assessment is up to them, right? So if we assess it and they just put it in as an Article 2, Article 2, whatever that is.
It was a line item.
But if we just put it in, if the select boards and selectmen decide to put it in there, then that's, again, we're back to like, we can't, as a school district, we can't place things on the wall. You can only say, we're going to assess you, and here's why. But I do think that pay language, we can certainly look at putting that in there. I guess my argument is we gotta figure out what we're doing, and then we can figure out how to do it. Because if we, 6 months from now or a year from now, say we're not gonna do 1.5 miles, I don't know, right, how much does this change? If we say we're gonna do 1.5 miles, we're gonna do start times, I don't know, how does that change? So, I don't know, I'm gonna make a note that says, if you're all okay with it, we're good with the language, but we should define, once we determine what we're doing, we should define how we're going to assess it specifically. And then, as those conversations progress, that'll flush itself out. Cool. Anything else on transportation? So, okay, so we got through everything. So I'm going to make some updates to the document. We'll take away the 2/3 legal thing. And then I don't know what this group wants to do in terms of meeting next. So I would think that the next step is going to probably be to go into the 2018 draft agreement and start looking at language and going through some of those pieces and seeing what does and doesn't make sense. I hope we already got the hard parts done, and so we're left with the easy parts. But that is kind of the goal for me. I also know, no secret, that we are in the midst of budget and town meeting season, and there may be some other things that need to be focused on for a little bit. So I don't know what folks' appetite is in terms of, do you want to try and meet again and do some of that, or do we want to get through town meeting and or elections first? What is the will of this committee? What would you like to do? And Jeff, do you have a preference too? Well, so everyone can speak. It doesn't, no particular order.
I guess my gut, my preference is to keep moving. I think we have some pretty good momentum going here, and like you said, Chris, we kind of hit some of the tough ones first. And, we're going to be losing you soon, and appreciate your leadership, so I'd rather keep moving.
So that was my comment. When are you actually done?
So I am done on May. I said I would stay through town meeting. Town meeting, I believe, is the first. So I'm done officially the 2nd. And so we can't meet on the 1st because we'll all be at town meetings anyways. So we theoretically have the 7th, 18th, and or 24th as potential meeting dates if we wanted to stick to Monday schedules.
17th is vacation week
It's next week.
and a holiday. Maybe we skip that week, but I do think we should meet the 24th.
Okay.
Yeah, and maybe we can have some answers to the questions.
You know, so we'll try and update this document, we'll try and
Yeah.
get some answers to the questions, and then, again, it's up to what you folks think makes the most sense to me. It was probably taking out that 2018 agreement and just saying, I don't know if we want to do it together or separately, like, okay, let's take a minute and read section 1. Anyone see anything in section 1 that we need to address, so on and so forth. And then, once that read is done, and hopefully we hash out anything that needs to be hashed out at the boards, then it should be as simple as taking this document and any markups on the 2018 agreement, sending them to legal counsel and saying, give us something that makes sense, and then it should be pretty close at that point, I would hope. So, does that sound like an okay plan? Because what I don't want to do is just meet for the sake of meeting. That I want to make sure we have productive time.
So would the task be go home, read this, come on April 24th, show up, having some
Right.
sense of what this
Exactly. I think
document
that would be
says?
wonderful, right? So we're going to get to section 1, it's going to be, okay, anyone have anything that jumped out in section 1? Anything we need to talk about, clarify, or generally, are we okay with what section 1 says? Okay, let's go on to section 2. And we'll do that for whatever, an hour and a half plus or minus. If we get to page 1, so be it. If we get to the whole thing, so be it, however we want to do it. But we'll do that for the 24th, same time, same place. So, fantastic. All right.
I'll wait to thank you, Chris, until the 24th.
No, and we're not doing that. We're not, no thanks. We're not even done. We got a lot left to do.
Yeah.
No thanks, no thanks. All right, well, that having been said,
I do have one quick, if I could jump in, one quick other matter I want to bring back to this committee. I think the superintendent and TAs have spoken about it. I don't know if it's something that needs to be in agreement, but working out a way for the regional school district to handle vocational transportation. I think it would benefit all towns, both towns, and the district. So it just seems like a no-brainer, but I don't know if it needs to be a regional agreement amendment or just something that the towns work out separately.
I don't know the issues.
Let me brief. So, a couple things. In vocational schools, outside of South Shore vocation, our students are going more to Bristol Aggie and Norfolk Aggie. And by past practice, that falls on the town administrators to, one, get a bill and pay the bill, and two, arrange transportation for those students. As a member district with South Shore, they provide buses, and they kind of feed it through, and we just pay them a bill. We have a person from Hanson and a person from Whitman on their school committee. For the other vocationals, we do not. But by statute, because we're a region, we don't get an assessment for those students. It goes right to the town, so the town pays that bill. I just get an application from a student that I approve, and then send it back. They then tell me if they're accepted or not, and I send those names over to the towns.
So the law says that the sending town must
Well,
provide transportation?
Yes, we need
Or
to
something
provide,
like
we
that.
need to provide transportation for for those students going to those vocations.
Yes, who's we? Or is that what we need to look at?
I will look at it, but I will tell you, because because the Bristol and Norfolk have become an issue on the South Shore, and every superintendent, it comes out of the school budget
Yeah.
to transport them, and they've been told by their attorney that they have to provide transportation for those students.
So maybe we do two things. Can we look at the legal requirement? And then the other thing, and not to be fresh, but we are a rack for Whitman Hanson, like there must be a regional agreement for Bristol, like what is that? Is there does the agreement spell this out?
We're not member towns.
We're not
so,
member towns.
yeah.
We're not member towns.
And it's different than choice.
Yeah.
It's not a choice. The student is enrolled in a vocational school. So this came out last year, more and more, because...
Are they doing it through choice then?
No, you just apply to vocational, and if the vocational accepts you, you go, and then the town gets billed.
The town also receives the Chapter 78, which is probably where.
Correct.
Yeah.
What'd you say?
The town also
Town gets
receives the
Chapter
Chapter
78
78 for
those
those
students.
students. And then we pay.
But it's the challenge for the town administrators, and I had this conversation with Frank and with Lisa, just to try to help them out a little bit, because I have a transportation department. Lisa and Mary Beth don't have connections with North River, with Fox, with whatever, and I can assist with that piece of it. But we took it one step further to say, should those vocational outside of South Shore be coming through the school department, because I will be able to understand and have a better understanding who's going earlier on, because right now, Mary Beth's going to get a bill, Lisa's going to get a bill April 1st, for maybe 7 students, maybe 12. We don't know. So it's just, I don't know if it's a regional agreement thing, but I think it's a talking point that we can probably work out together, and maybe do a side letter once this is in,
I'd like
because
to
that
explore
might,
that.
that might change, because of the vocational pieces in Massachusetts and requirements in Massachusetts, which have changed over the past 3 years anyway, for acceptance.
So I'm thinking it might just be some sort of policy, but I can't imagine it would be
Right.
regional, just because it's.
But I want to break.
Yeah. Right, well, I mean, we could ask, but I'm
I'm sure
thinking
Frank
like in
brought
my head.
it, you guys brought it, because I had this conversation with Lisa last year, 6 months ago, and then I said to Frank, I said, how did this come about? He goes, well, we've been doing this since before I became TA, but nobody went to Norfolk, or nobody went to Bristol, and now kids are starting to go more and more. And it becomes problematic as well, because you don't know when that student leaves. Because if they go until October or November and they come back here, you would have no idea, you could still be sending the dollars out that way.
Does Bristol have a program that the South Shore Tech doesn't
Yes.
offer that's become
Yes.
very popular?
Yes. Turtles.
Turtles?
Yes.
And large farm animals.
Yes.
Like horses and
Okay.
cows.
Yes.
I'm not going to suggest that South Shore investigate.
So-
offering turtles. They sound very expensive.
Yeah, both very good
Right,
schools,
right.
but yeah, we've noticed an uptick in those applications.
It goes like turtles.
Yeah.
All right, good. All right, so we have our next meeting time, the 24th. We covered everything today. Great work. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second. All those in favor? Awesome. Thank you.